outline of a tree. That's where all of us imagine beginning, and that's where we are going to start in this project. But there's a few steps I'm going to teach you before we can confidently put down the outline. Before we can confidently put down the outline. We can confidently put down the outline. We can confidently put down the outline. We're going to start learning to draw with a familiar and beautiful natural object, this leaf. I'm going to use this subject to teach you some special ways that artists look and see to understand and draw the world around us. This project in particular is great because it teaches you how to take a complex shape, in this case a leaf with many lobes and points, and draw it accurately. And also, the subject is relatively flat. It's not volumetric, which makes it a good starting point. I've included a reference image of this leaf in your class materials so you can work alongside me. But before we actually put pencil to paper, I want to go over the basic drawing tools you might use as you start drawing more. And we're going to talk about how to set up your workspace, and then we'll start our leaf project by blocking in some shapes and using a simple technique called enveloping. This project can be done with any basic white paper and a number 2 pencil from your desk if you're eager to begin and don't have other materials. For this demonstration, I'll be using a drawing pad that is 11 by 14 inches, which is a great size for all of the drawing exercises we're doing. Feel free to use an 8.5 by 11 white copy paper if you want to get started. I also have a drawing board and 2 drawing clips to keep my pad on the board. I'll be using a Ticonderoga number 2 pencil, a yellow pencil you can find on your desk. I'm going to use a white eraser. I'm going to be using a blending stump, which I'll show you how to use for some shading later in our lesson. And I'm going to use a kneaded eraser for careful erasing as we're developing our drawing. And last, I'm going to be using a knitting needle to do some measuring and checking angles. You can use anything that's long and thin, even just your pencil or a barbecue skewer or even a chopstick, anything you have on hand. Any art supply store will have these basic drawing materials, but resources are available online and you can have them shipped anywhere. My advice is start simple and add more as you figure out you really need it. Next, let's talk about how to set up your workplace. I am working at an easel. I like to work at an easel because I am nice and upright. I can look comfortably at my drawing pad and at the subject that I'm studying, just be easily turning my head. I don't have to kind of bend over and strain my back and neck. I have a full range of motion for my arm and shoulder, and I don't have to kind of lay my hand and smear my drawing while I'm working. The other thing I love about an easel is I can step back a few feet from my easel and then I can see little errors and things that I need to correct. If you don't have an easel, there's lots of ways you can set up using a chair. A couple of ways to do this: you can sit in a chair and lean your drawing pad against a table so that you have it at an angle, and that makes it able for you to move your arm around, not smear your drawing, and have a full range of motion. You can also use 2 chairs and still setting your drawing board in your lap and just lean your board against the second chair. For our still life setup, we have a leaf hanging on a pin on a wall. And I have a bright light that makes a nice clear shadow shape. So you could use any leaf for cutting. And then we also have this leaf in your reference materials for you to work alongside with. So now we're going to start the BlockIn. I know that instinctively you want to start this drawing by drawing the outline of the leaf. But the first lines that we're going to put down are not going to be the outline at all. They're going to be light lines that will guide us when we make our contour drawing in lesson 2. This first stage of our drawing is what's called the BlockIn. The BlockIn is a tool to help us see the unified whole of what we were drawing before we put in small details. The BlockIn is light, straight lines that accurately map out the placement and angles of the shape of the leaf. This BlockIn method is an easy foundation to every project we're going to be doing and the beginning stage of all of your drawings, no matter what your subject. I'm going to show you several steps in the BlockIn to break it down for you. So let's start with the first line. The first line that we're going to draw is going to be the central axis line of our leaf. I'm going to start up here at the top where the leaf is hanging from the nail and go straight down to the bottom of the leaf, making one long straight line. I'm making light lines and I'm not worrying too much about making it single, straight, perfect, just light, sketchy lines. So you see I've made one single line that's at a slight angle. So this is the central axis line, and I'm noticing that the leaf isn't hanging straight up and down. It has a little bit of an angle, and I want to make sure I capture that. It's important to learn to check angles when you're learning to draw so that you can learn how to see accurately what you're looking at. So to do this, I do a couple of things. First, I'm going to use my knitting needle, and I'm going to look carefully at what I'm seeing. I'm going to hold my knitting needle up, and I'm going to hold it to the line that I'm thinking about drawing. The knitting needle is hitting the nail at the top and the point at the bottom of the leaf at the bottom. I'm going to hold my arm out very straight, locking my elbow, and I'm going to use my needle to follow that same line that I just tried to draw. Then I'm going to swing my arm over, keeping it nice and straight to my board to see how I did when I drew it in the first place. And then if I need to make a correction, if it's like, oh, it's a little more like this, then I'll just kind of redraw it, correct the angle a little bit, and then erase out maybe the first one. So that's one way that I like to check my angle. The other thing that I do to check my angle is that I like to use a rose compass. That's this little diagram I have on my picture that shows a true vertical and a true horizontal and a circle, so it's like a compass shape. And the reason I like that is that when we begin to draw, we have a real tendency to make things that are close to straight up and down really vertical, and things that are close to horizontal really horizontal. So when we look at the angle on the leaf and then look at how it is compared to a true vertical, it really helps us notice and realize that it's not the same. So using a rose compass is going to be a really helpful way to teach your eye to see that the angle is slightly off, maybe the vertical or horizontal. This helps us make sure that our drawing is dynamic when we make sure that we don't make things too straight up and down. So now that I've checked the angle on my central axis line, I'm going to keep going with my envelope. First, I'm going to make some marks to see where the top and bottom of my drawing is going to go. So I'm just going to make a mark just loosely up here, that's about the top of my drawing, down here about the bottom of my drawing. I'm just doing this by eye, giving myself some marks on my paper so that I have some room around the edges of my drawing, and I'm going to make my drawing in the middle of my page. Once I've kind of made some marks for the top, bottom, left, and right, I'm going to draw the envelope. The envelope is a 4 or 5-sided shape that your drawing fits into, almost like a letter fits in an envelope. And I'm going to use angles and make 5 lines for this envelope. I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to draw a line and looking at the angle that goes down this way, going from the point where there's that little branch that goes up, and then the stem of the branch going over that way, so that point over there. Just loosely sketching it in. I'm not worried too much about making it perfect. Again, from the top, going from that uppermost corner there down to the far left point of the widest part of the leaf. Again, just looking at the angle and trying to, by eye, make it as accurate as I can. I found that bottom point already, so now I'm going to go from there and look at the angle and just lightly sketch it in. You can see I'm making a line, not just one line, but kind of a loose, sketchy set of light straight lines. Going back up to the top, I'm going to make this side of my envelope from that stem down to that widest point of the leaf down here. So I kind of first looking from this point to this point and tossing my eye back and forth, and then lightly making the line. and then the last one from the widest point of the leaf on the right down to that same point at the bottom again. So now I've made 5 light straight lines and 5 different angles, and that gives me 5 different angles to check for measurement. So I can use my knitting needle again and just hold it up again to look and see, starting maybe at this line here. And just see, did I get the angle about right, or did I make it too straight up and down? Again, for the bottom, this one, holding it up from point to compare. On the top, and that one I feel like maybe I want to correct a little bit, making it just a little bit steeper. And again, just keeping it light, keeping it open. I'm not going to worry too much about getting it perfect. And then on the side, on this side, and look, you can use your pencil too. Now this one is a good example. I think I straightened that line up a little too much. It's close to the edge of the paper. So that one wants to come in a little bit more too. A little bit more angle. So I'm always keeping an eye out for where the angles are maybe a little bit more than maybe I first made with my first mark. So now that I've made this first envelope shape, I'm going to keep finding some other points to help me measure this thing accurately. The next thing I'm going to do is use a little bit of triangulation, which is still using angles to check the proportion. I'm going to make a triangle that goes from the widest point of the leaf on this side to the widest point this side. And the reason this is helpful is now I'm not only thinking about where is the top and the bottom, but how do these two sides relate? In other words, where on the paper is this point up and down, and where is this point up and down? So if I look across, then I'm using a triangle to check that placement of those points. And again, I'll use my knitting needle. Look carefully, swing my arm over, and check, did I make the angle right? The reason triangulation is so useful is that it's really easy for us to understand the proportions of a triangle in certain kinds of shapes. So let me show you over here. If you have a triangle that is tall and skinny, like that, it's really easy for our eyes to see the difference between a triangle that's shorter and fatter, right? We can easily recognize those shapes. Something like this, you can easily recognize the difference between, say, this triangle, kind of like the one that I made there, and one that's like this. And we can use that ability to recognize those differences to help us build an accurate BlockIn. Why is it important to start with these simple lines and angles instead of going right into the details of the leaf? It's because early on in our drawing, we want to lock in an understanding of what the proportions of our drawing are. How tall, how skinny, short and fat, and this really helps us make our drawing accurate and naturalistic. So we're learning how to do this all over looking, not focusing yet in on the little details of the leaf and the lobes and the veins, but I'm looking across the various parts of my drawing, from the little branch up at the top to this outer point, across the whole thing on the top, getting every part of my drawing organized in one place on the paper, and then noticing the proportions of them. Now that I've created this envelope, I'm ready to start subdividing my BlockIn, and it's going to start looking a little bit more like the leaf that we're trying to draw. So going back to what I'm looking at, I've made this triangular triangle for the bottom part of the leaf. Let's try to start developing some shapes up here for the upper part of the leaf. For one thing, I think I want to make a little mark for about where that nail is, because that's kind of a nice central anchor point that I can kind of keep going back and forth to. We use that on our central axis line. And another thing that I'm looking at now is that the stem actually has sort of two lines. One that goes a little more straight up and down, and then one that angles back. So you can see how my central axis line was a simple line that just in one line showed the general direction, and now I'm starting to break it down a little. Keeping my lines light and loose. Thinking about that nail, then I want to find this top part of the leaf right there, where the stem ends and the leaf begins right there. So now I've got 4 points, this and then the bottom and the left and right. And with that, I can start breaking down the 7 different lobes in the leaf. There's like major, large lobes and then little tiny points and details. I really am just looking for the big ones right now. And I'm going to start with the simple things that I've already kind of found and then use those to help me find the other details. So I found this point out here, so let's start with that lobe. And again, I'm just looking at angles and making light straight lines. Starting to make some angles for the outer edges of that lobe. And I'm going to do the same over on this side, light sketchy lines. I don't really know how to find all of these things in the leaf yet. This process of drawing is teaching me how to do that. So if you're feeling a little like you're not sure where to go, just allow yourself some time to kind of keep going and research and figure out where the parts go. So I'm going from point to point. There's a point, the leaf there, and then at the bottom of the leaf, there's like 3 points. That one there, maybe that one there, that one there. So I'm subdividing my large triangle into the smaller segments to find the placement for all of these parts of the leaf. So I'm thinking about the placement of everything and not looking at little details. So I've kind of found the bottom lobe with these 3 points, these big lobes here, and now I just really have 2 left up here. And I'm just looking at angles and making straight lines. Finding the point that is the farthest out point on that leaf. Making kind of a straight side there and a straight side here. I noticed that right in here there's kind of this little complicated part right there. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm really just looking at these points. And then if I want to, I can use my knitting needle and kind of hold that up to one of those straight lines that straight angle lines that I'm trying to find, like this one right there. And I can check each one if I want to. So that one, now that I'm checking, I feel like it needs to be a little more like that. Check this one. Yeah, it's pretty close, but maybe it's a little too thick right here. So that's the first stage of figuring out how to block in all of the smaller lobes of this leaf, but without adding any too many little details that get me confused. I want to keep my framework really light and open. It's really important that you're able to feel a little relaxed in this stage, that your lines are light. If you start to feel a little frustrated and start to feel like, I don't know how to do this, and I can't, then it really makes it harder. So it's almost easier to just Notice how you're feeling and try to take it back a little bit to the earlier stage of keeping it light and open and light, and feeling like if you don't know where to make that line, it's okay to make quite a few, and remember that what we're going to figure out later is that we can erase out all the other parts that aren't helpful. So I've made a bunch of loose light lines that are really just the beginning stages of me figuring out where to put all the accurate right lines for my drawing. It's very helpful to kind of put something up and then give yourself something to correct, and don't feel like you have to get it perfectly or know what you're doing from the beginning. So I've given myself something to fix. Now what I want to do is slow down a little bit, kind of look at each area of my leaf and see if I can correct it, tune it up. I'm going to go back to where I began with this lobe here, and I'm going to try to start breaking down my BlockIn a little bit, looking at thickness, how wide it is here, the placement, and see if I can shape up my BlockIn a little bit more. So right here, I'm noticing that that lobe is maybe a little thinner. And I'm going to add a little bit more information about how it tapers at the end. You can see that there's little tiny points and changes of directions on the end of the leaf. I don't want to draw those right now. I'm just looking for like the biggest things, like here's the point at the end of the leaf, here's this little like cranny where it curls in on the inside. I'll add more detail later. So from this little cranny there, then going down, I'm looking across, scanning my eyes across the whole thing, looking at the widths of the leaf, looking back and forth both at my drawing and at the leaf that I'm studying. Looking at the angles, trying to train my eye to observe those angles accurately. Keeping my lines loose and open and pretty straight. I'm not trying to make little curved lines. I want my lines to be straight. It's a lot easier to control and easier for your hand to make. So he makes it easier for you to feel relaxed in this stage, using kind of sketchy lines. Again, kind of up, finding that little cranny, making it pretty straight right there. Later I'll add a little more detail. Then looking from point to point, from this point to that point of the leaf. Thinking about the angle, how steeply does it go up and down? Now I'm skipping it. I'm going to get back to this. I'm going to skip over to this point. So here, for example, I am going to add that little change of direction right there, right? Because it kind of is fatter up at this point, and then gets skinnier right here. And then right here, I kind of need to see that little vein right there to make sure that I'm getting it connected to the center. So I'm just going to lightly block in that little vein line so I make sure I get those connected. Not trying to make those lines very detailed, but I just want to put that kind of in the right place, and that helps me find it. So you see every line that I'm making, I'm kind of making a first try, giving myself something to look and correct later. So don't feel like you have to get it all right now. Working my way around up here. Again, there's kind of, it gets a little skinnier right there. So I'm adding, refining the shape and making it a little bit more detailed. Finding that cranny. And then let's add that stem, this little branch. sketching it in lightly, and then that little sort of like round little branch up there. So now I've at least made a placement for all of the different parts of my drawing. And I think the next thing I need to do is I need to clean up some of the lines that I don't need anymore. So let's start erasing out some of the parts that we don't need. Now that I've shaped the block in, I'm going to erase out these original guidelines. And clean up some of the extra marks that I no longer need. I'm using my white eraser because it makes very clean. It really gets the page all the way back to white. And I'm not worried if I accidentally, erase out a line. It's okay. I'm keeping the whole thing sketchy and light. I'll go back over and fix anything I need to later. So you can see those original BlockIn, those original envelope lines, I really needed to help me find all of those points, but now I don't need them anymore, so I can take them out. And then I'm left with a shape that's starting to feel a lot more like the object that I'm trying to draw. So the last thing I want to do before I go on to the next stage of my drawing is I just want to block in some of the shadow shapes, which are going to be part of my drawing as well. So remember that I have this single source light coming from the upper left, and so that means that all of the shadow shapes are all going to be falling to the lower right on my picture. I want to just make sure that I'm observing how they are falling consistently. And that is going to make my drawing look realistic by showing the accurate direction of the light. So that's the first thing I've noticed, is just how the shadow shapes are all falling to the right on my drawing. And I'm going to sketch them in the same way with those light BlockIn lines that I did for the leaf, and in fact even keeping them even a little bit more open. The details of the shadow shape are not as important to me as the details for the contour of the leaf. And it's even more important here that you keep the quality of the line for that shadow shape loose and sketchy. So I'm just following around the little shape of the shadow. Noticing places where it's thinner because it's closer to the wall. Over here, there's a very small little strip of shadow because the leaf is touching the wall pretty closely there, but falling down to the right. And over here, the shadow is wider because the leaf is farther away from the wall. By observing carefully the consistent light direction and then noticing where it's thicker and thinner, then it's going to make my shadow look really realistic as it's falling on the background behind my leaf. And I'm going to just put in the little shadow for that stem, which kind of shows how the stem projects off the wall, and that gives it nice dimension. And you can see I've just kind of marked in placement for those shadows, and that's enough information for now. When you learn how to begin your drawing with a central axis, the envelope, and then the BlockIn, you've created